Janessa. Hey, congratulations on participating in this documentary War Game.
Thank you very much.
So let's get straight to it. How did this simulation actually came about? Where the original idea actually came from to create a simulation for this?
Sure. Yeah. Well, I am the CEO of an organization called Vet Voice Foundation. We're a nonprofit organization, nonpartisan, that helps veterans get involved in issues that are important to them. We represent about 1.5 million veterans and military families across the country. And after January 6th, we were increasingly concerned about extremism in this country, and in particular in the military and veterans community. The military and veterans are a reflection of our society. And so any issues that we have in American society are also reflected across the active duty forces. And we know that vets and military families have been disproportionately recruited and targeted by extremist groups because they have a lot of respect and appeal in our society. So after January 6th, when we saw how many veterans have participated in the insurrection activities, we thought it was really important to do something that was productive about it. So we decided to stage this exercise in DC with the intent of looking at the problem of what happens if you have another contested election in this country, and this time the losing candidate calls on folks who have been radicalized within the military or the veterans community to actually take part in helping them take power. And so the intent was to do this war game, produce a report, tease out some vulnerabilities, some unanswered questions, and provide that to the administration and to Congress, which we did. But we also wanted to have a public accountability piece of it to allow Americans to really understand the depth of the issue and some of the challenges that elected leaders and appointed leaders might be facing.
So how did it came about that that you guys you folks invited a documentary crew to film all this simulation?
Well, first we were thinking maybe we'd invite a news entity in to kind of cover it, but we realized 6 hours reduced to like a 7-minute segment was certainly not going to have the nuance that we felt was necessary to communicate about this issue. And a member of my team happened to know Warren Littlefield's creative partner. They went to school together growing up, and he was kind of talking to him about what are some ideas, could we make this into a documentary? And he was totally blown away by the concept. And Warren ended up reaching out to our directors, Jesse Moss and Tony Gerber, and we just were able to assemble a complete rock star crew. The editor, Jeff Gilbert, I think is a genius. 6 hours of 7 camera feeds and like 30-something live mics, and he was able to pull out, I think, a pretty compelling story out of all that footage. So it was really one of those projects that just had a little fairy dust on it, I think way beyond what we had ever anticipated as a simple little nonprofit trying to make a policy impact.
Most excellent. Tell us about the participants that you actually got for this project. I'm actually surprised because a lot of the names that participated in this, I've seen them on the news before.
Yeah. Well, it was incredible. These are people who have either held these positions in the past or have held really proximate positions to them. So senior leaders from the U.S. military, a former governor, two former senators, General Wes Clark, the former Supreme Commander of NATO. So, these are serious people. And I think what drew them to the project was one, many of them we already had some relationships with, had done either some advocacy or policy work with in the past. But for others, they really do see this as an existential threat to American democracy, this rise of authoritarianism and extremism in our country. And so that is how we were able to bring in folks from the last 5 presidential administrations, Republicans, Democrats, and folks who are staunchly nonpartisan to participate, because they don't see it as an issue that's just Democrat or Republican, but a threat to our national security.
So when you are creating this scenario for the simulation for them, you didn't want to create something exactly like January 6th. So how did you want to create this scenario and trying to input I want to say the unpredictable variables into something like this?
Our intent was to look forward, not backwards. So obviously January 6th caught all of us or many of us by surprise. But we wanted to really think through what could be in the works in the future. I also felt a strong obligation to not put anything into the world that could inspire bad actors to do something that would harm people. So every inject or every twist and turn in the scenario, we took something that's happened in the real world and we just kind of smashed it together into one terrible day and turned the dial up just a little bit. So obviously, the Insurrection Act has been invoked in American history in the past. There have been attacks on state capitals. There have been attempts on lawmakers' lives and safety. And so we kind of put all those existing things into one terrible day and wanted to look at what would happen if, the insurrection spread beyond Washington, D.C. And so those were sort of the motivating factors. And with the express intent of learning from the assumptions that people who had held these roles in the past would make, and how those assumptions might lead them down the wrong path.
Now, for those people who don't know, especially those people who could watch this documentary and doesn't understand the Insurrection Act, could you define that for us and why this is very relevant during this simulation and documentary?
Yeah, well, we filmed this in January 2023, so we didn't actually know who the presidential candidates going into the 2024 election would be. But since we filmed it and since we kind of pulled apart this piece in particular, the Insurrection Act has taken a front and center role in the Republican Party's platform. The Project 2025 proposes that the President of the United States use active duty military forces to go into opposing political parties' states. So in this case, it would be blue state governors, and use active duty military as law enforcement. That's a right the president has via the Insurrection Act with relatively zero checks and balances from Congress. This is a unique authority to the president. Project 2025 also proposes that the president use active duty military to deport people from this country who are suspected of being here illegally. I think that is a massive shift and break in how Americans conceptualize civil-military relations. And we, in 2022 and 2023, I guess we're fortunate or unfortunate enough to be deeply concerned about the Insurrection Act and how it could be used against American citizens and against the idea of American democracy. And we really wanted to examine how a president might weigh whether or not to employ that tool.
Absolutely. And in the case of, when people watch this, because the simulation is for a 6-hour period, why 6 hours? I mean, it could have been any length of time, actually.
Yeah, well, I don't know if you've ever spent a lot of time with governors, senators, and generals, but to get them to sit in a room and stress out for 6 hours I think we gave them, there was no break in the entire scenario. There was like a room with food in the back, and of course they could leave to use the restroom or whatever, but it was just 6 hours straight through. So that was about the length of time that we could conceivably keep them in these people with very busy, very important lives in one place, with the allowance to have, some briefing at the front end and what we call a hot wash at the end, where they kind of go over, some of the learnings that they pulled out of the exercise.
So you must have been very impressed about your participants during the 6 hours there.
I was floored. I mean, not only by their commitment to the scenario and their roles, but like it was as if I was a little concerned going into it that the cameras and the sort of glamour of the sets that Jesse and Tony had designed for them would make them nervous, they would kind of dial back who they were. But it kind of had the exact opposite appeal. The drama of the set, the way that they designed it, so the crew who was all in black you couldn't really see them in the room. They just dove right into it. And I know everyone was exhausted by the end of it because it was high stress in the room. That definitely comes across on camera, but I was very impressed by all of them.
I'm actually curious, if the documentarians didn't create that set for you, what was the original scenario it was supposed to be?
Well, it's so funny you asked that because I've done a lot of different war games. Sometimes they're done over Zoom. Sometimes they're done in a windowless conference room. Most of the time, that's what they're done, in a windowless conference room. And so when we were recruiting people to participate in this, of course, we had to tell them up front, this is going to be on camera. You're going to have to sign a release form, all of that. And everybody said, yeah, nodded, of course. They sent us the paperwork back. But I don't think it was until they walked into the room day of that they really were like, I mean, everybody's face when they walked in was like, what is this? You know, I as a Marine, I've done plenty of war games in uniform. Sometimes they're on a ship or you have a command center set up, but nothing as elaborate as this was. This is probably a once in a lifetime experience.
Now, a war game simulation such as this, usually I would imagine it to be secretive, but obviously it's filmed for a documentary, and you're sending out a report to Congress. Why isn't this a secret, or is it supposed to be the whole purpose is to be as public as possible?
Well, we were pretty concerned when we actually did the exercise about security of the participants. You know, people who speak up on this topic, this isn't just like something that is politically charged. It's actually physically dangerous. A number of the participants, especially those who are Republicans who spoke out against the Trump administration and have spoken out against things like Project 2025, have been targeted by extremist groups, both online and in the real world. Some of our participants have been doxxed. Some of them have had the police called on their homes. And so, you know, participating in something like this was a real act of both physical and moral courage. And so we wanted to do it. We made sure to do it in secret, and everyone, you know, we had security there day of. And we also, you know, wanted to make sure that we weren't putting anything on film that would be inspiring or that revealed some sort of internal US government protocol that shouldn't be. So thankfully, Jesse and Tony, although they had complete creative control over the film, they did allow us to take a look at the final cut and say, you know, flag anything that we felt would be potentially damaging or risky to national security. There was nothing like that in there, but we didn't want to put it all out into the world without having that check and balance.
Great. And tell us what else does Vet Voice Foundation do that you could talk about?
Sure. Yeah. Well, most of the stuff we absolutely can talk about. I will say we're doing some follow-on exercises in in states across the country. One of the big learnings from this exercise was there's a lot of thought and energy and expertise being put into thinking about federal loopholes, gray areas, things that need to be shorn up to strengthen our democracy. But local leaders, a lot of the times, are on the front lines of some of these fights or challenges, especially if you consider something like a sitting president utilizing active duty military to go in and become a police force in a state where the governor actually doesn't want them to be there. So we are taking a different scenario, but similar and related to some states around the country to try to exercise folks there. We also do a lot of work on policy that impacts veterans, and you know, that might be things like healthcare or housing. Those are things that people generally think of when they think of veterans, but also things like reproductive health care and the climate crisis. These are things that impact us and our children and our families. And so veterans have a very important voice in issues like that as well.
That is so true. That is true. So true. So, Janessa, let me wrap it up with one last question. As audiences have a chance to watch War Game, what is the one most important take you hope they walk away with?
I hope that they think very hard about what democracy and freedom actually mean. They aren't just slogans that you know, we can throw around on the 4th of July or before a football game. They are concepts that only exist if we work to ensure they exist. And so I hope that people take away that democracy is a contact sport. We need everybody involved. And I hope that as audiences see the film, they will be inspired to be more involved in their communities, in their democracy, and have those tough conversations with people they love.
Well said. Well said. Well, thank you very much for speaking to us about War Game and also Vet Voice Foundation. You guys are doing terrific things, and I'm really crossing my fingers that your scenario never comes true.
You and me both. Thank you so much, Gig.